We've all been entertained by films like Working Girl and The Devil Wears Prada, but behind these humorous tales lie true stories of women's continuing struggles in the workplace. But what really happens when those workplaces focus on business and finance? How do women truly fit in? And with all the strides women have made into positions of power and command, is the business world still mainly a boys' club? Tonight, the truth behind women, Wall Street, and the workforce. I'm Ernie Manouse, and this is Houston 8. Joining us tonight is Nina Ghadawala, author of Suits, A Woman on Wall Street, and the founder of CEO MindWorks. Let's try that again. And the founder and CEO of MindWorks. Also, remember, you can join the conversation as we go through the program tonight on Twitter using hashtag Houston8. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
I told you what my first question was going to be, but since I slaughtered your introduction, I'll give you a chance to tell us what's MindWorks.
MindWorks is a company that I founded that focuses on going into corporations and doing training for leadership, stress management, and diversity. And it really all came out of my experience on Wall Street in realizing one of the challenges people were really having was actually managing themselves to be better leaders. So much of our focus is about, I have a problem with this person and this person, but how do you deal with yourself in order to create a better environment for everyone, especially when you are a leader?
Okay, we'll get to all the other stuff in a minute, but you triggered a thought for me.
Yeah.
All too often people are always saying, I can only control myself, not the people around me.
Yes.
But the people around you can be causing the trouble. The people in work, there can be those people in your office that stand in your way, that block you, that all that. Whether I'm in a happy place or not, how does that actually change them?
Well, the way it works is if you have a mindset of it's all the people around me, and that's what majority of us all have. We have this mindset of the reason I'm not getting ahead is because of my boss. The reason I'm not getting ahead is because I have this challenging situation. And often it's not wrong. Those are challenging situations, and you do have very challenging people. But the reality is by sometimes changing your perspective, you're able to change your behavior and influence them in a different way. And that's where you come in, is you have the control. You have the control to influence people in different ways. It doesn't change them from being a difficult person, but the relationship you have with them is able to change. And a lot of it starts with changing your perspective. And these are challenging things. So people talk about them, we say the words, but nobody really has a sense of how to do them. And when I started on Wall Street, I felt like those were my challenges, is the environment, the people around me, the culture were not what I was used to, what I was comfortable with, but I didn't really have the tools to work with them. So a lot of this is giving people, at MindWorks, we give people tools to work with.
Okay, now we're going to take it back to the story.
Yeah.
And before we get all into the story, you were in the world of investment banking.
Yes.
I think a lot of people hear the term, but I don't think a lot of people know exactly what that means. Let us just start right there.
Sure. So I was in the finance industry, and the finance industry is huge, but I was in a very specific area. So I was at Morgan Stanley, which is one of the top investment banks, and within that there's a division within the company called investment banking. And a lot of it is the core of a lot of what happens at the company, and a lot of the powerhouse is really in investment banking. But it's still it's a small piece of these large Wall Street companies. And some Wall Street companies don't even deal in investment banking. But investment banking is focused on, a lot of times it's the IPOs, the initial public offerings, secondary offerings, and mergers and acquisitions. That's kind of some part of the core of the business that gets done there. But you'll meet people in so many different types of financial roles that have nothing to do with investment banking.
Would it be safe to say, though, investment banking is that you are investing the bank's money for future gain? Is that what investment banking is?
No, it's not. You're typically serving clients, and our clients where I worked were the largest U.S. companies, so the General Motors, the Boeing. You are raising money for them, or you're doing some sort of service for them. Sometimes you're helping them with a merger and acquisition, but it's typically you're looking out for the client, and they're trying to raise these huge amounts of money in some way.
Okay,
or do some sort of large transaction. It's not the banks. That's a totally different area of finance.
Okay, so Company A comes to you, and they want to, and I know, I'm sorry if I'm belaboring this point, I just want to make sure people understand what's involved in what you're doing. So Company A comes to Morgan Stanley or whomever, and they ask for what? Why would they be put in touch with an investment banker? They're a big, strong company.
They ask for millions of dollars. They need to. They don't go unless if they're doing a bond offering. they need to raise the money in the public market. They don't have the relationships with all the different individual and these large institutions and investors. That's what investment banks have. They have the relationships for these large companies to raise their money.
So what do you do in your daily job for them? Who are you talking to? What are you doing?
I came in as an analyst, which is kind of at the lower level. So my bosses would be the ones that are constantly interacting with the CFOs and the top management of these massive, large blue chip companies. That's what they do. And then I was the support system for that. So it could be, a lot of times it's running around and doing very administrative things like making copies and coming up with these pitch books and trying to convince these companies that they should choose you. So it's a lot of pitching and selling in the corporate finance area, which is the area of investment banking that I worked in. Or it's it's doing the financial modeling to try and determine how do we price this? How do we price this deal? What do we do? So there's a mix of a lot of different things that you get to do. Okay,
and as a child, this was what you wanted to do?
Absolutely.
Why?
I had no idea what investment banking was. I was at University of Texas, and I just come from a family. It's an immigrant family, part of this Parsi community that's really, what I would say, a little, obsessed with success and doing very well. So I remember my mom called, my couple months into my freshman year at University of Texas, and she said, well, do you have a job lined up? And I just, I tried to explain to her. I said, Mom, nobody's looking for a job. I just started. I'm just trying to pass my classes. And she said, no, you've got to line yourself up. You've got to think strategically. And she was in the business world. So she, told me I needed to go to career fair. I went my freshman year, and I had no idea what business was. I didn't know anything about working. I'd worked at a grocery store before, and I walked up to the first person that was friendly, who happened to be from J.P. Morgan on Wall Street. And so it was through that I even got exposed to what this was about. And the way she talked about the internship is she said, we dine at the finest restaurants in the country. We take you all on a New York cruise around the harbor. And, she just kind of sold it with all the fun, and I was absolutely sold. I was very excited about it, and the idea. I'd basically grown up in Houston, and I had pretty much hardly left Texas. So I was ecstatic about the idea of going to New York and checking out this whole new scene. I had no idea what investment banking was. I didn't know what finance was. I just started working in it, and I think a lot of people that get themselves there have no idea what they're about to get into.
Okay, but now you talk about the wooing that they did, and obviously, since you're here and what we're going to get to in the book and all that you wrote, things don't work out peachy keen. Yeah. It's not the warm, exciting place you're going to. But from this point in the story, why would they even be looking to attract you? Why are they in here looking to bring a woman into an industry where they're going to then shun you once you get there?
Yeah, so I don't think the shunning is intentional by any means, and that's why I think part of it is just bringing voice to the fact that I do think people look at it and see it as it does feel equal in a lot of ways, in that if you look technically at what people are doing, we brought you in, we put you in groups, we didn't choose that you can't go in a group. It seems on the surface that things are equal, but what becomes more challenging, it's not just as a woman, but it's someone with a different background that doesn't necessarily fit into this tight group of, I've lived on the East Coast for a majority of my life. I've spent, we've been in country clubs. We play golf on the weekends and tennis. And, these are the kinds of things that we do. When you come in and you're coming from a different background, where that's not how I grew up. I kind of grew up in a relatively middle-class family in Houston. It's just more challenging to break into something basic like a conversation where people are exchanging how they spent so much time traveling to different islands and exchanging the extravagant hotels and the different countries that they've been to. It's harder to. That's what's valued kind of in this group, and it just becomes hard to break into basic things. And so much of getting ahead there are the relationships by far. And your status is very important.
Correct me where I'm wrong in this, but it sounds as though what you're saying is that you were an outsider. And Absolutely. A lot of people feel they're outsiders in different groups.
Sure.
And even from what you said from the business you run now, too, it's about how do you infiltrate, how do you become part of.
Yeah.
Is that more a problem of the people's perceptions of what situation they're in, or is it really within the industry that's keeping you out?
Sorry, explain that again. So,
is it your perception of being the outsider? Is it not feeling like you fit in that holds you back, or is it truly the structure of the organization that's saying you're a woman, you're of Indian descent or Pakistani descent? Is it?
Yeah. So I don't think people approach you that way intentionally. I think unintentionally we all do that. We work in shortcuts with our mind. We see a person. I was the only woman in a group of 20-something guys, and they weren't used to having women. So they definitely have. I remember when I first started, one of the guys said to me, he was like, yeah, the last woman that was here, I just want you to know that she cried. Or, he just, like, that's the stuff they remembered. She cried like one time or something. But it's just, they have this idea that you're not going to, you have to prove yourself. You know what it is? If you're not part of what they're used to seeing, and this is just normal. I mean, it happens all the time. We go into a situation and we're not used to seeing that kind of a person. You expect that person to prove themselves to you. And I felt that was definitely there. I knew I was coming from a public school with, everyone was Ivy League. I had come in, I had a couple different experiences, but I was on the younger side. I was a woman in a group of 20-something guys. So there were a lot of things where you have to prove yourself. And I actually did. It's not that you can't. It's just, I think it takes a lot more work. And what you see is women, minorities, people of different backgrounds coming in. They stay for a little bit. And then a lot of the attitude is, this is why would I put up with this? I mean, that's probably what you'll hear the most of is so many of my friends were women and minorities that did leave. And it's along the lines of, you know what, I could have such an easier experience somewhere else. And I could be focused on the actual work instead of focused on the politics, am I making the right impression? Was my shirt showing too much here? I mean, a lot of women had different kinds of issues where they were kind of being kind of stereotyped in different ways. And that became challenging. So the environment's challenging. It's not impossible. But I do think you have to work a lot harder at all these soft things that normally you don't think about. So it's not just about coming in, being smart, and showing off your smarts. That's a given, and you have to do it. It's just there's a whole path of navigating it and doing it well.
Do you feel that these are the same issues faced by women across the workforce, or do you think they are specific to the finance and business world?
Yeah, so I actually thought, I knew that the Wall Street experience, I knew I was getting into something extreme, so we worked around the clock. We could work over 100 hours a week. You basically gave up your life to work there, and it was understood. So I only knew my experience, but when I've heard from readers, I've just been completely flabbergasted with, it doesn't matter, I mean, across industries, I hear from people all the time of, I've had such a similar experience. I felt like you wrote my story, and it was just interesting. That was very unexpected to me. So what I do see is that it's at different levels. I think some of the things that, I went through or saw were much more extreme than other people, but I'm consistently seeing across different industries, it's very, very similar, and it's not just in the business world.
What do you think businesses can be doing to... And I have plenty of friends who work in the finance field, and I hear of these wild stories that I wouldn't think are... And I've heard other wonderful stories of the finance world, so I'm not condemning them.
Yeah.
But it seems to have its own, in some sectors, its own idea of how the world works. And it seems very far from what those of us on the outside see the world as being. Meetings, a strip club is not an odd place to have a meeting.
No, it's not.
In this profession, so I have been told.
Yeah.
The amounts of money that they are dealing with seem inhuman to us. We can't put our minds around this. How does that industry then relate back to the everyday person? How does it relate and understand the world in which it lives in?
I think that's where there's a problem, is it doesn't necessarily relate to the kind of everyday person. The culture, and it depends, these companies Morgan Stanley is huge. There's departments in there. I can describe the culture of what I worked in, and I know people that work there in totally different departments. Their experience is nothing like this because it's a completely different culture. But in that area, it is the extreme. I think you'll find it in some of the financial industry areas more so. But it's, they called it the work hard, play hard. So it's drink as much as you can, extravagance to the extreme, always about pushing the envelope to the, it's always on the borderline. It's not, what's ethical, what's right, what are the right things to do. It's like, how much can I get away with without it being illegal? And some people actually are very pleased with the illegal things that they'd be doing. But it's that kind of a culture. It's a different. It's not your everyday person. I think for the average person to look at it becomes very challenging to even understand the mindset of this person.
Right. There are women who have made great strides in this business, in this company even. What is it that they have that allows them, do you think, to move forward, and what is it that you think some women, it blocks them from being able to make it through?
Yeah, so I was very lucky I did have women kind of, mentors to some extent. I interned there, so I did work with a few women there in a different group. who were very successful. So they're actually still there, doing very well at the company. And so I got an insight into what it's like. And part of it is they go through a lot of it. They put up with so much more, I think, than the average person would put up with. And I do think there was definitely a generational thing because they had been there for so long. Their careers were pretty much at the company, and they were willing to put up with so much more. Whereas they look at the generation when people were coming in at mine, it was more like, why do I have to put up with this? For them, it was, the more challenging it got, the more they saw, and they see all these things that are happening around them. They're not blind to it. They realize they haven't been treated fairly. They realize things are happening around them. And they kind of look the other way or find a way to get around it. And so they're definitely, it's a certain kind of personality. I do think, as I saw with my generation, it was much more, there's so many other places I could work that would be, I could actually focus on my work and not deal with all these different things. And I think that was challenging for them to hear as senior women. It was very disappointing.
Do you think, because we're dealing with a business that is high stress and big money and a lot of pressure is going on there.
Yeah.
If I was getting an honest answer from a young gentleman who went into the same field, do you think he would be facing a lot of these same things and dealing with them? And how would a young gentleman deal with it as opposed to a young woman?
Yeah, so I do think it's definitely challenging for male or female. It doesn't matter. Part of going into this is a very prestigious program where they pick a few people from, the top Ivy League schools, and they're all kind of fighting to get into this kind of a program. So it's very competitive, and it's an honor to be part of it. But the guys are just as challenged. I mean, it's challenging. I think if you have a different background, you're challenged in different ways that the guys won't even notice. So the guys' challenges. I mean, I had a very good friend who had no interest in going to strip clubs. I mean, it was much easier for me. I was never invited. It all happened, I worked in this group of guys, and suddenly everyone would be gone, and there would be no explanation, or people would leave for lunch, and I wouldn't know where people went, and I'd find out later through other people. Whereas for the guys, it's very hard for them to get out of situations. So, they had different challenges, but I do think, I remember when I was in business school, one of the reasons I did think it would be interesting to write the book is because I talked to one of my MBA classmates, and he said to me, it can't be different. I mean, how could it be different from, it's very hard to see when you're not in that position. Just the way I don't know what it is to be, to have some sort of physical disability. You don't know till you're in that position. So I think it's harder for them to see, but by all means, they had so many challenges. I mean, the guys were on antidepressants, they were becoming alcoholics, all kinds of issues that were facing men and women alike. The men were not.
If the foundation is so difficult to navigate, if these entry jobs put you through the ringer that they do, is it like in medical school when they do the residency program, it's those ridiculous hours and all that? Eventually it falls into a pace and life lightens up a little, but they've gone through the fires of hell, so to speak. Is that the same with the finance world from your point of view? Is there a place where you break through a certain level and things start to fall into place, or do you feel that this kind of behavior continues right up through the top?
Well, I think when you get into the kind of world so it's so all-encompassing because that becomes your life. It wasn't about you weren't able to really leave that world to some extent because you didn't have a lot of friends that weren't investment bankers. This group became all-encompassing. It's where you spent all your time. Because of that, I think you're so influenced by the culture that it becomes a little, and the culture was, there's little dangerousness to the culture of, everything was at all costs. Money was always first. All kinds of things that I think become challenging. I think that gets seeded in your mind, and if you grow up in a culture like that, I think it's actually quite risky. If you're not able to see different things, different perspectives, it's in that kind of environment, people with very different perspectives aren't necessarily welcome. It's really about conforming and becoming as much like them as possible. So I do think your workload lightens up and you become more senior, and it's very much a power trip for people because a lot of the stuff that we had to do as analysts was the idea of I suffered through it and you'll suffer through it. So a lot of stuff wasn't even necessary to do. It was like create work that was created that you'd stay up all night doing, and no one would even necessarily use it the next day. So that would happen a lot of times.
What was the breaking point for you when you said, I'm walking away? I'm finally done.
So much of it was I was actually doing pretty well. I was doing well, and I knew it. And part of it's because I could see what you need to do to succeed. I'm good at seeing that. And at the time, I was very open to conforming and being like, yeah, I can do that. I can do that. And I think so much of it is just wanting to succeed in that environment. But I think my breaking point was I got a sense, I started becoming, when I first got there, I would look at things and think they were a little crazy, not agree with things and just see them to be different. But then I started seeing myself becoming like them. And one of the things was just looking down on other people. There was very much this, we're the smartest people, we deserve to get paid the way, this extreme entitlement that I wasn't used to. I mean, my parents are immigrants. It was kind of like we always have to work hard, and there wasn't this extreme entitlement. But there's very much an entitlement that we deserve everything that we get, and we get paid millions of dollars because we're the smartest people. And there was this looking down on everyone is like, why would I ever want to work at a corporate company where I would just be a small little director over here? We're kind of ruling the world. And I think I started to pick up on all the mentality and everything, and I started to see myself doing it, and there was a part of me where I just started getting confused about who I was, if I belonged there, and how dangerous it would be to stay there even longer.
We look and we can see we've got a female mayor of the city of Houston. We have an African-American man for president of the United States.
Yeah.
So a lot of people would say, well, those glass ceilings have been broken. There are people in positions of power. Outside of just your own experience, I want to talk now. Has the world, from your point of view, changed? Can anyone succeed in today's world?
I think a lot has changed, and I always think there's progress. I'm very positive about it, and I don't think this is an environment. I always encourage women, minorities. Go into it. It's just, I think there's an education, and you have to be a little bit more eye-opening about what you're doing. What I think the biggest mistake, that I think one thing that's holding people back so much is when you're part of a system, you're not allowed to, no one says it, but it's unspoken. Part of the culture is you're not really allowed to articulate so many of the things that you see and are facing. There's a corporate speak to what you should say and what's appropriate. So when people ask you, why aren't women moving up in the world? You say, oh, well, when we go and recruit, there aren't women there, so we're just doing the best we can. There's something that you're supposed to say. There's a party line often, and a lot of times people aren't able to speak what's really happening and say the things. And because of that, I actually think that it's making it more challenging. There's very much under the surface of what's happening, and people aren't articulating what's happening.
You use the and I want to say excuse, but you say they weren't there for it. But if you think about in the school system and stuff, the women that are getting interested in finance, where this is beginning, where they're being trained for, by the time they get to the point where they're picking careers, that yes, they've probably been weeded out by a system that doesn't put everyone on equal footing to start with.
Sure.
But then is that the fault of the investment companies? Is that the fault of the people at the last level of check when there aren't those women available at that point, or certain minorities or things like that? What should companies be doing to level that field, or is it even their responsibility?
Yeah. So I'm not going to say it's their responsibility to get the people, necessarily at those recruiting events, but it is their responsibility when you bring in. They, with very good intentions, spend so much money bringing in diverse talent, but they don't take a lot of responsibility on how do we create an environment that's inclusive so that people want to stay. That's where I think the real challenge is. It's not, I think they can bring people in, they'll find people, they can go recruit people. And the person that was coming to get me all the way at UT was part of a diversity program trying to come get people from different, and they spend a lot of money doing that. But the reality is if the attitude is, no one in this company is going to make any sort of change, or people aren't going to be a little bit more open-minded or think broader so that we can see different perspectives, that's a challenge. You want to don't bring people in if you're going to create an environment that's not welcoming.
Do you think, though, that is an actual initiative from higher up in a corporation, or do you think it's just the community that's gathered? I mean, is it a conscious thing to say, you know what, we feel more comfortable with other people, so if things are harder and they fall out, so be it? Or do you think it's just the way it evolves?
I don't think I don't think it's intentional. I think people don't even realize it's happening. So from the perspective of, hey, we brought in these people and they left, a lot of, I heard it a million times. It's like, oh, you know what, you're going to bring in women and they're just going to leave because they only want to work in the workforce for a couple of years anyway. They'll probably have a family. So a lot of it's the attitude. The attitude is more along the lines of, that's just natural. The women, the minorities, they're probably not going to stay anyway. Whereas I think that's a very flippant attitude, and part of it's not understanding on their part that people didn't. That was a very difficult culture, and it was different. It's hard for you to see if you're not experiencing it. But it was, it was a very challenging culture. But I think that's so much of the leadership's responsibility to create those environments.
In the last 30 seconds, how can they do that?
One of the main...
How's that for a 30-second question?
That's a good 30-second question. I mean, I think that's part of what we focus on at MindWorks is how do you, as a person, a lot of what I saw is that people weren't able to necessarily, deal with the stress levels, that they didn't know how to deal with very challenging things. And so you as a leader, it's your responsibility to create inclusive environments. So being able to even notice the things that it's these subconscious things that we do that we don't even notice that exclude people, whether it's having a conversation knowing that, half of your staff are not going to be at exclusive resorts for half the time, so we don't need to talk about that. There's all kinds of subtle things that you can do it's creating an awareness that you don't normally have.
Okay, well, thank you very much for sharing your story and good work with MindWorks.
Thank you.
And the book, of course, Suits, A Woman on Wall Street. Now, each week we invite you to visit our home online at houstonpbs.org/Houston8. There you can read about the guests, learn more about the topic, and even watch past episodes. Next week on Houston 8, with the news of Houston becoming home for Anglicans and Episcopalians who want to join the Roman Catholic Church, we'll explore the ever-evolving world of the church. That's next Friday night right here at 8 on Channel 8. And that does it for us tonight. Until next time, I'm Ernie Manous. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.